In previous videos, we've learned how to use the Fisher equation to find out the nominal interest rate by adding up the expected real interest rate and expected inflation rate. Nominal interest rate equals expected real interest rate plus expected inflation rate. In this video, we'll look at the redistribution of wealth under unexpected inflation or deflation using this formula. If the expected inflation rate is 3%, and you decided to buy a bond with a 10% fixed rate of return, the real interest you expect would be 10% nominal interest rate minus 3% expected inflation rate, which equals 7%. Nominal interest rate, 10%, equals expected real interest rate, 7%, plus expected inflation rate, 3%. Expected real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus expected inflation rate equals 10% minus 3% equals 7%. Nonetheless, the market's expected inflation rate is not always accurate. When the actual inflation rate exceeds the expected inflation rate, we'd say there is unexpected inflation. When the actual inflation rate is higher than the expected 3%, for example, becoming 5%, the real interest rate decreases. Nominal interest rate, 10%, equals actual real interest rate, 5%, plus actual inflation rate, 5%. Actual real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus actual inflation rate equals 10% minus 5% equals 5%. Therefore, under unexpected inflation, the actual real interest rate, 5%, is lower than the expected real interest rate, 7%. That means the purchasing power of the interest you gain is lower than expected. In other words, as a bond holder, you suffer a loss under unexpected inflation. On the contrary, as an interest payer for bonds, the bank gains because the actual interest rate, 5%, is lower than the expected interest rate, 7%. Next, let's move on to talk about unexpected deflation. Similar to unexpected inflation, unexpected deflation represents a negative inflation rate, which is lower than the expected inflation rate. If the market expected inflation rate is 4%, and you decided to deposit your money into a bank with 5% fixed rate of return, the real interest you expect would be 5% nominal interest rate minus 4% expected inflation rate, which equals 1%. Nominal interest rate, 5%, equals expected real interest rate, 1%, plus expected inflation rate, 4%. Expected real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus expected inflation rate, equals 5% minus 4% equals 1%. If there's deflation in the market instead of inflation, the real inflation rate becomes a negative number, such as minus 2%. Thus, the real interest rate increases. Nominal interest rate, 5%, equals actual real interest rate, 4%, plus actual inflation rate, minus 2%. Actual real interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus actual inflation rate. 5% minus negative 2% equals 7%. Therefore, under unexpected deflation, the actual real interest rate, 7%, is higher than the expected real interest rate, 1%. That means the purchasing power of the interest you gain is higher than expected. So, under unexpected inflation, you gain as a depositor. On the contrary, as an interest payer for deposits, the bank suffers a loss because the actual real interest rate, 7%, is lower than the expected real interest rate, 1%. In the two situations we discussed, the interest rates are fixed. When interest rates are fixed, wealth is redistributed when unexpected inflation or deflation occurs. However, there are also floating interest rates on the market. A floating interest rate is an interest rate that moves up and down along with the actual inflation rate. If people pay or receive interests according to a floating rate, there's no redistribution of wealth. People can change the amount of interest they pay or receive according to the actual inflation or deflation rate to cancel out the effect of such unexpected inflation or deflation.